This presentation is brought to you by the SDG Decision Education Center.
Hello, and welcome to 5 Mistakes Every Decision Maker Needs to Avoid, brought to you by SDG Decision Education Center and Texas Executive Education at the University of Texas. I'm Lynn Slattery, Director at Texas Executive Education and manager of a portfolio of open enrollment programs designed for busy professionals. This portfolio includes the Strategic Decision and Risk Management Certificate Program, which brings together the academic research and practical application teaching of UT faculty and 35 years of experience in strategy, consulting, and decision education of SDG, and serves as the basis for our webinar series. We are proud to be partnering with SDG on this series. Today I'm excited to have an expert in the field of decision-making under conditions of complexity, Hannah Winter, here to share her knowledge with us. Hannah will discuss the fundamental framework for a good decision, as well as decision qualities, foundational concepts, unique approach, and thinking tools. She'll provide a series of validated takeaways, all focused on increasing value and minimizing risk through improved decisions. Hannah, I'll turn the floor over to you to begin.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm going to take you through a little demonstration of the fundamentals of decision-making under uncertainty, and I'll use that to illustrate some very common mistakes decision makers need to avoid. Consider this risky opportunity. Some of you may have seen our thumbtack demonstration if you've taken some classes with us. This shares a few characteristics, but it's got some expansions. You have the opportunity to invest $20. Note that your investment will not be returned regardless of how things turn out. Once you invest, the $20 becomes a sunk cost to you. For those who think this is unfair, it's real life. How many business decisions do you face where you get to keep your investment whether you have a good or bad outcome? The return on your investment is uncertain. Again, that's the same as real life, right? We'll simulate the uncertainty using a very small deck of 4 playing cards. There are 2 aces and 2 kings. We'll shuffle those and put them face down, and someone will pick out 2 cards. If the 2 cards are aces, you'll get $66. So you've put in 20 and you get 66 back. That's a pretty good deal. If the cards are an ace and a king, you'll get $33. The order doesn't matter. It can be an ace and a king or a king and an ace. So you put in $20 and you get $33. But if the 2 cards are kings, that's a really bad outcome. Not only will you get nothing in return, you'll have to pay another $18 on top to get yourself out of the mess. That's a real risk that you'll be facing. And again, as a reminder, you won't get that initial $20 investment back. Some of you may be wondering, what does this have to do with corporate decision-making and the 5 mistakes decision makers should avoid? Well, I'm using this because it's a simple demonstration. Everyone understands aces and kings, and it's going to allow me to illustrate these 5 mistakes. So stay tuned. I'd like to do a poll. I'd like all of you to consider whether you'd like to invest in this opportunity. Would you like to invest $20? You can answer yes, no, or I don't know. There's just not enough information to decide. So go ahead and click your option, and we'll be able to see the poll results in a few minutes. This is a pretty straightforward decision. Only 2 alternatives, invest or not invest. So let's close the polls and let's take a look at the results. Okay, it looks like more than half of you want to invest. 53% say that they'd be happy with this investment opportunity. 17% say no, and 30% of you say you're not sure. You need more information. Let me make the situation a bit clearer so everyone truly understands. I'm going to draw a decision tree. Those of you who don't like math, don't worry. The hardest it's going to get today is arithmetic, addition, and multiplication. Squares are for decisions, in this case, invest or don't invest. If we don't invest, we put in nothing, we get nothing, right? So it's 0. You'll see that at the very right-hand side there. If we do invest, we face an uncertainty, which we represent as a circle. We could get 2 aces, an ace and a king. Note that the order doesn't matter, or 2 kings. I put the outcomes of 66, 33, and -18 on the ends of those branches. So let's think for a moment. What is the chance of getting 2 aces? There are 4 possible outcomes. An ace and an ace, an ace and a king and an ace, and a king and a king. So what is that probability of drawing 2 aces? Let's do another poll. What do you think is the chance of drawing 2 aces? You have some options here, 0 to 15%, 16 to 24%, 25%, 26 to 50, or over 50. So go ahead and put in your response there. We've tried to put in some ranges there to make it easier for you to vote. So go ahead and put in your responses, and then let's take a look at the results of the poll. All right, so 81% of you say it's going to be 25%. That stands to reason, right? That the chance or probability of getting 2 aces must be 1 in 4 because there are 4 possible outcomes. Ace, 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 king, king, ace, and king, king. There's no reason to believe that one is more likely than another. That's the reasoning most people go through, and they come up with that, and it looks like most of you did. But actually, the chance of getting 2 aces is lower than that. It's only 1 in 6, or 16.667% for those of you who like decibels. And looks like only 9% of you answered that. So let's make things a little bit clearer with a tree. This is a probability tree, since there are no decisions in it, and that might make things clearer. So what's the chance of getting an ace as the first card? Well, there are 4 cards, and 2 of them are aces, so it's 2 out of 4, or 50%, or 1/2. And now that we've pulled out an ace, we only have 3 cards left, right? So what's the chance of that second card being an ace as well? It's 1 out of 3. So the chance of getting 2 aces is 1/2 times 1/3. Sorry about the math there, but we have to do just a little bit of multiplication. And 1/2 times 1/3 is 1/6, or 16.667%. And here are the rest of the probabilities. That's the logic, but I can tell you that when we do this for in-person or online audiences, most people don't find it intuitive. So those 81% of you, don't feel bad. This is a very common trap people fall into. It seems like such a simple problem that people do it in their heads, and then they often get it wrong. So that leads me to mistake number 1 that decision makers need to avoid. We place too much faith in our intuition, even in simple situations when it feels like we should use intuition. Our brains are not wired to make good judgments about uncertain situations. Uncertainty and trying to process that in our heads, it's just hard to do that intuitively. It's easy to fall into traps. I'm sure you've all seen this situation in your personal and professional lives where people rely too much on their intuition. They just make mistakes in processing. This happens all the time. Let's go back to our investment opportunity. Now that we've got the correct probabilities, let's think through how much this deal is worth. We can do what's called an expected value calculation. The expected value, or EV, is what the deal is worth to someone who's completely risk neutral, someone who wants to play the averages. The EV is straightforward to calculate, and I'll show you this show this by building up the formula. So don't figure it out until we've written it all down, okay? So let's compute the expected value at that blue uncertainty. That's going to be 1/6 times 66. That's the probability of 2 aces times the outcome you get when you get the 2 aces. So that's 11, right? 66 divided by 6, plus 2/3 of 33, that's 22, plus 1/6 of -18, that's -3, and we add those together to get 30. So I'll put that 30 right where that uncertainty is. Then, going from right to left, since we put in an investment of $20, when we subtract that 20 from the 30, we get a net of 10. Do you see that 10 right next to the decision box? And if we don't invest, we still have that expected value of 0. And since 10, which is invest, is better than 0, which is do not invest, we would choose to invest, and we put an arrow on that branch to indicate the preferred decision for an expected value decision maker. That's about as simple and clear as we can get. Now, I know you're not making corporate decisions about aces and kings, but you might face a similar situation in corporate life. For example, imagine multiplying all the numbers by 1 million and thinking about this as an organizational investment. You invest 20 million, and there's a chance you get that top branch. You're first to market, you get 66 million. But you might just be in the middle of the pack and be on that second path, 33 million. Or you might be late to market and you need to do a lot of extra work to stay in the market and make your presence known, so you'll have to almost double down and invest an additional 18 million. With your own corporate decisions, I encourage you to think through how you might draw a tree like this. Your decisions are most likely more complicated than this, but a tree can often help you structure your thinking, even in more complex situations. So I'm going to do another poll. I want to ask you again, would you like to invest $20 in this opportunity? And you've got same options as the very first poll I did with you about this investment opportunity. Yes, no, or I don't know. There's still not enough information to decide. And I'm hoping that I've made things a little clearer about the odds and how you might think about this. So I'm eager to hear how your responses have changed, if at all. So let's close the polls and take a look at the results. Wow, okay, so now 87% of you would like to invest. That's up from 53% before, and that's great, and it's common. When things seem clearer, people feel better about making this investment, and I certainly would if I were in your shoes. So now let's imagine that we're all together in a room, and I choose a volunteer who wants to invest to play this game, and they hand me the $20. Okay, so imagine that they've handed me the $20. I want to do another poll. Now that the person has decided to invest, was the decision to invest a good one? They invested $20 in something with an expected return of 30, an expected value of 30. So go ahead and respond, yes, or no, or you know what, I don't know, it depends on how it turns out. So do you think this was a good decision to invest $20 or not? So go ahead and answer the poll, and let's take a look at your responses. So 84% of you say yes, it was a good decision. 8% say no, and 8% say it depends on how it turns out. That's fantastic, and I think I agree with you. I think it's an excellent decision, but I want to address the 8% of you who say it depends on how it turns out. Why does it depend? People want to know how things turn out before they can declare the quality of a decision. So that leads me to the second mistake. Obviously, you won't fall victim to this, but people you work with might. People confuse decisions and outcomes. If you fall into this trap, you cannot get to quality decisions. Quality decisions are only useful at the time you make them, not with hindsight. And that distinction between a decision and its outcome is so fundamental and is confused in individual decisions and in corporations. What we measure primarily is outcomes. We put all the attention on what we measure as opposed to the decisions that can really make big changes. But we must judge the quality of a decision at the time it is being made, not after the outcome becomes known. We control the decision, we do not control the outcome. So we have to put our efforts into making the best choices we can. A good decision with a bad outcome is still a good decision, but this is really hard for people to accept. How often do you see this in your organization? And a good test is, keep this in mind, would you make the decision again if you were in the same situation? Remember in our example, our player invested $20 in something with an expected return of 30. I say, and 84% of you agree with me, that that's a good decision. Now, imagine that you're the player. Remember, we all agree, or most of you agree, that this is a good decision for an expected value decision maker. You have just invested the 20, and before you draw the 2 cards out of the 4-card deck, someone offers you $22 to buy the deal from you. Should you sell at this point? So you've got two options. Yes, I'm going to make a 10% return in 10 minutes, or no, it's worth a lot more to me than $22. So go ahead and enter your response. Would you sell right now, or would you hold on to it and try to get a better deal? So let's take a look at your responses. So 20% of you, yeah, absolutely, the fastest return I could imagine. And 80%, no, it's worth a lot more to me than that. I agree with those of you who said no. That's wonderful. What you would be willing to sell it for should have nothing to do with what you paid for it. You cannot anchor on that $20 initial investment at this point. That $20 is sunk. So here's mistake number 3. And I guess I'm addressing the 20% of you who wanted to sell quickly. We focus on past or sunk costs that have already been incurred and cannot be recovered. And it's a lot easier to fall into this trap the larger and larger those sunk costs become. We need to remember that decisions are about the future. Money that is already spent or sunk is money that does not matter. Future costs are all that matter. Yet people focus on money that's already been spent and they refuse to let go of the past. We see this really often in organizations. I'm wondering if you do as well. Now let's go back to the very beginning. You haven't invested anything at all yet. What if, in addition to the initial 2 options of investing $20 and not investing, there were a third option to invest and mitigate? So here's our tree from before. It's exactly the same as before, right? The $20 on the top, invest, and do not invest on the bottom. And this third option, which I've drawn here in the middle, means that you pay an extra $8, so your initial investment is $28 instead of $20. And if you purchase the risk mitigation, look at what's happened to that 2-king outcome. It goes from a negative 18 to a positive 6. So you spend that extra $8, but you're much better off in that 2-king situation. You go from a negative 18 to a positive 6, so you go up $24. So think for a moment. Look at this carefully. We've got that original investment on the top. We've got do not invest on the bottom. Those are the same 2 options as before. Or do you think that this middle option of investing and mitigating to avoid that very negative outcome is actually better? So which one of these 3 investment options would you choose? So let's do another poll. Which one would you choose? Would you choose to invest $20 without the risk mitigation? That's the original deal. Would you do this new one, investing $28, including the risk mitigation? Or would you not invest? And I'm hoping it's one of the top 2 and not the bottom, since we agreed that investing in general is a good idea. But which one of these is better? Investing $20, no mitigation, or $28 with mitigation? So let's take a look at the poll results. And 60% of you almost say, I would stick with the original deal. 40% of you want to go with the mitigation, and none of you now want to go with do not invest. Okay, I like that. So is mitigation a good decision? Let's do the math. One of the key points I want to make here is that we can calculate the value of risk mitigation. If we can quantify risk and we know the impact of risk mitigation, we can figure out what it's worth. And this is a really key point in risk management. So starting at the bottom, if you don't invest, the expected value is 0, right? And nothing has changed in the original deal. The expected value at the top for the uncertainty is 30, and if you invest the $20, then your net is 10. In the invest and mitigate situation, we do very similar math as we did before. We do the 1/6 times 66 plus 2/3 times 33 plus 1/6 now with the positive 6, and that adds up to 34. But we've invested $8 more, right? We've invested $28, so our net is only 6. So if you're an expected value decision maker, 10 is better than 6. Both are better than 0, so you would still choose the original investment to invest the $20 and not purchase the risk mitigation. And About 60% of you agreed that that's the best thing. So here's our fourth mistake that people often run into. We fail to think through the value of risk mitigation. But the value of risk mitigation can be calculated. That's also true, by the way, for the value of gathering more information, although I won't have time to take you through a demo of that today. We make many decisions to mitigate risk or to gather more information, for example, doing a pilot project, doing market research, without truly understanding the value. How often does that happen in your organization? But note that these kinds of things can be calculated and the value can be understood. This is a very simple example, and a more complex example would be more complicated to figure it out, but it can be done. So you shouldn't blindly mitigate risk or gather information without understanding the value you're getting from it. Okay, I'd like to take a look at one more situation. One more time, go back with me to the very beginning, to the original opportunity, but note that I'm going to raise the stakes. This is exactly the same situation as before, but I've multiplied all of the dollars by 100. So you would invest $2,000 instead of $20, and the outcomes would be $6,600 for two aces, $3,300 for an ace and a king, and a negative $1,800 for two kings. And I've taken the whole mitigation question off the table. This is the original opportunity. So again, same situation, same deck of 4 cards, same probabilities, but all the dollars multiplied by 100. The expected value is now 3,000 at the uncertainty instead of 30, and your net is 1,000. So what do you think I'm going to ask? Same question. Would you like to invest $2,000 in this opportunity that has an expected value of 3,000? All right, so take a look at the tree, and let's go to the poll now. Would you like to invest $2,000 in this opportunity? You've got some choices. Yes, I want to invest $2,000 for a deal with expected value of 3,000. No, I do not want to take the chance of losing 1,800, or I don't know. There's not enough information to decide. This one's a little tougher. The stakes are higher, but I'd like to know what you would do. So let's take a look at the poll results and see what you think. So 85% of you still want to invest in this. 14% do not want to take a chance of losing 1,800, and 2% you don't know. There's not enough information. So interestingly enough, I am not able to fake you out here. I'm not able to trick you, because the number that would invest in this is just a slight bit lower than those who are interested in investing $20. So you must be a very enlightened audience. But let me show you what the fifth mistake is, that if you don't fall into this trap, others around you I'm sure do. We tend to be risk averse, even in situations we can easily afford. And I'm taking a leap of faith here that you can easily afford this, but I bet when you take a step back and think about it, most of you could easily afford this situation. But people have an aversion to loss. It's actually what's called a zero illusion, because it's an illusion of a loss. You always have to think in terms of your total net worth. But this aversion to loss distorts people's attitudes and inappropriately affects their appetite for risk-taking. And that makes us leave value on the table. I know I've been talking about personal risk here, but this is just as true for executives. We see this over and over again in corporate settings. Executives want to avoid a negative number, but you really need to think through your risk appetite. In most situations you face, which are not high stakes bet the company situations, you should be acting in a risk-neutral manner, looking at the expected value rather than the possible losses. When you want to get to high-quality decisions in risky situations, you need to have well-thought-through risk preference and beliefs and overcome some of these natural distortions that come with the way we're wired. So now I've shown you 5 mistakes that decision makers need to avoid. I'm curious, which of these 5 do you encounter most often in your organizations? Do you place too much faith in your intuition? Do you confuse decisions and outcomes? Do you focus on sunk costs? Do you fail to think through the value of risk mitigation? Or do you avoid risk, even in situations you can easily afford? And you might see a few of these in your organization, but I'd like you to just pick the top one. So let's take a look at the poll results and see which one is the most common for our audience. So it's spread across some of them. Looks like a third of you place too much faith in your intuition, or your organizations do, and confusing decisions and outcomes is also near the top. That's pretty interesting. I hope that this webinar has helped you identify what some of these mistakes are, and you can think about how you can avoid these by focusing on good decision making. So I've now highlighted for you these 5 key mistakes, and I've actually taken you through the fundamentals of decision quality to do so, although you probably weren't aware of that. We need to have alternatives, what you can do, in this case, invest or don't invest. We need information, what you know and don't know, expressed well. We need the consequences, what we want, expressed in an effective numeric way. We need to combine it all with sound decision reasoning. In addition to that, you need to make sure you're solving the right problem. We call that an appropriate frame, and commitment to action once the decision is made. The math and analytics are pretty straightforward, but the hard part is wrestling decisions into this form. They don't come like that. So we have to wrestle it into this form of what we can do, what we know, what we want. And this way of thinking can be very powerful when turned into practice.
Thank you, Hannah, for bringing us your expert insights on the mistakes that we make and how we need to think about them, and as decision makers, how we need to try to avoid them. That was really interesting. So, Hannah, the first thing we have I wanted to bring to you is, how would you prioritize which factors to address in decision making? There's a lot of things to think about, but how would you kind of prioritize them?
Well, Lynn, that's a really good question. There are so many things you need to think about when you're making a decision. And for me, it really works to think about the framework of decision quality and the 6 elements: appropriate frame, making sure you've got alternatives. Information is an area where people get really concerned because decisions are all about the future, and the future is uncertain. So how do you get information about that? But I find that all of these 6 elements, frame, alternatives, information, values, reasoning, commitment to action, they are all really important. And in fact, I wouldn't prioritize any one over the other. The thing to look out for the most is that organizations tend to focus on the area where they feel the most comfortable, and they focus on that a lot. So for example, if an organization is really into analysis, they'll do reasoning to an extreme. They'll face analysis paralysis, and they won't focus on the others. I think the most important thing is realizing that there are 6 elements that you need to consider when making a decision and driving to quality, and you need to spend equal time or good amount of time on each, and focus on the areas where you're the weakest rather than the area where you're the strongest.
Thank you. Yeah, that helps us, I think, to stand back and look at our organization and see where we have the biggest issues, and maybe address those first. I have one other question that I think we can still sneak in here before our time is up. You've talked a lot about the mistakes that people can make. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how to help other people avoid those mistakes?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lynn. You know, half the battle, or even more than half the battle, is knowing that the mistakes exist, that they are so common and pervasive. And I myself find, even though I'm a decision professional and have been for quite a long time, I find myself falling into these traps. For example, sunk cost fallacy. My goodness, I spent so much on this, I've got to do it. You've got to stop to think about all the mistakes, make sure you avoid them, rather than just plunging in blindly and trying to make decisions quickly or in your head without realizing that these are big traps that everyone falls into. So I think that's the biggest piece of advice that I can give.
Wonderful. Thank you, Hannah. I also want to say thank you to all our participants for spending your time and energy with us today. That is all the time that we have for today. We will answer additional questions offline that we didn't get to today during our time with you. We look forward to connecting with you again soon, and please let us know if there's any questions that we can answer. Have a wonderful day.